how can you factor all these things into a modernization plan? So you come out with improved performance, improved security, cost savings, and where can you make improvements that will bring you the biggest bang for your buck?
Technology is transforming how we think, how we lead, and how we win. From Intervision, this is Status Go, the show helping IT leaders move beyond the status quo, master their craft, and propel their IT vision.
Welcome to Status Go. I'm your host, Jeff Tunn. Before we get into our episode today, I have a favor to ask of you. If you enjoy the Status Go podcast, whether you are a frequent listener or this is your first time joining us, tell a friend. Send them a link or post on social media. Let others know about us. We would really appreciate it. With that, let's jump into the episode. Welcome back to our continuing series, Mythbusters, Cloud Security and Innovation. Like the much more famous Mythbusters TV show, we're going to dive into several myths, and through interviews, case studies, data, and of course, podcasts, we're going to bust that myth. As you know, this month we are debunking the myth that the cloud is too expensive. We've heard from Braden Pitts of MJ Insurance. We've heard from Nick Lumsden of Tenacity.ai. And today we're going to talk with Intervision's own John Gray. John is our Chief Product Officer. He's been involved with the cloud back when the cloud was barely a whisper of cirrus making its way across the sky of our tech lexicon. Who better to help us bust that myth? So, John, welcome back to Status Go.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here again.
Well, and you have been a frequent guest, and you've also been a host here on Status Go. So we're going to skip the typical, hey, share a little bit about your journey, and we're going to dive right in. So, John, let's unpack this myth. You've been involved in cloud technology since the early days. Where did this myth that the cloud is too expensive come from? What started this whole thing?
Well, I mean, the cloud can be. The cloud done wrong can be expensive. Like, any form of technology, if executed poorly, it can be expensive, and it can be, it doesn't enable your business. If you step back and think about it, the whole purpose of technology, whether it's cloud or on-premise or anything, is to, make life better, right?
Yeah.
Tools enable things, not constrain, but so often we find that technology is constraining businesses, right? And what's happened with the cloud in some cases is a lot of the discipline that people had around setting up data centers, setting up servers, working methodically through the different disciplines have been not executed. And so the old style way of doing things was at times slow, laborious. In the cloud, you can get in there and you can turn stuff on and turn it up overnight, and it's great. But you can turn a whole bunch of things on that you forget about, or you can execute it very poorly. You can replicate your on-prem architecture in the cloud, and often that is not the right way to do it. So there's a whole bunch of ways to do the cloud wrong, which are, cost you money in the long term.
Yeah. So it's almost too easy, right? We made it too easy on ourselves to deploy this technology.
Certainly. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. I mean, we hear a lot about shadow IT and things like that, where, often in large organizations, you've got decentralized departments, focus on their own thing. That works well for the business for a lot of reasons. Over the decades, Jeff, both you and I have seen the pendulum swing between centralized IT and decentralized and back and forth. And there's pros and cons to both, right?
Yeah.
And so you can implement things extremely quickly in the cloud. Great. It gets you off and going. If you then have the discipline to kind of stick with it and look at the costs and, and make improvements. You don't have to get it all right initially, right? But you also don't want to forget it, right? So there's lots of ways to go about it where you can achieve the agility and the things you want for your business, and not overspend in the long run. But you need to use some of the disciplines that we've always used in IT in the right ways. So
Well, I know from our conversations, John, you've been involved in some horror stories about runaway costs, where you've been called in, you and your team have been called in to try to cap the geyser, if you will. Can you share a couple of things that you've done or your team has done when you've brought in that case to try to get things back under control a bit?
yeah, I mean, a couple of examples come to mind. Both of them came at me in this very similar time frame a couple of years ago. One was a shipping company that was extensively using DB2, IBM's relational database,
Yep.
and their business was growing very fast. They had a sudden sort of expansion. They they were just massively constrained by the I/O on their database, and it was really hurting them. So they took advantage of the cloud. DB, got things up and running in the cloud on servers. Got DB2 installed, got everything running and performing well, and got them through that. And then 3 or 4 months later, when the CFO got to see the bills of what they had in the cloud, they're like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what the heck?" And that's kind of when we got the call, right? Because their guys had implemented DB2 in the same way they'd implemented it on prem, got them through, the period of time that they needed to stabilize their business, taking advantage of the new contracts they'd won. But they were just desperate for help. They didn't know the cloud. They were really frightened to make any changes because things were working, right? The business was humming along, but the costs were,
Yeah.
very high. So we got some of our cloud engineers in there, really sort of understood their architecture, and we made some initial changes within a day or two that immediately sort of saved them some pretty big chunks of money. Shut down certain things at certain times of the day. Took advantage of some caching and things like that, and then got in there with them and looked more closely at the application architecture and made a few modernization changes with them to their application so it could really start to take advantage of some of the cloud native aspects of things like RDS and whatever in the cloud, and
Yeah.
sort of incrementally got them to a much better place
Uh,
where they're now spinning up test environments and shutting them down, when they need to, rather than having, big test environments running all the time. And really, they've sort of learned, and we put a bunch of automation scripts in place for them that they're leveraging. I think our team continues to work with them, but that was one example. In a similar sort of time frame, we had a company come to us who was really pushing the limits, bleeding edge on AWS's version of Hadoop, and their bills were staggering. The money they were spending, but they're also their business was phenomenal. And what they had done was, really push the limits of AWS's implementation of Hadoop. It was, as you will see with some of the cloud services that come out, they're not always fully formed with the latest things that are released, and not everything works as described, on the box.
yeah.
And our engineers were able to get in there and figure out, working closely with the AWS team, what was going on and what that particular client was doing that was causing, basically things to run so hot and not scale back down as it was supposed to.
Yeah.
So, that was an example of our ability as a company, as a Amazon Premier partner. We had great leverage into getting to the people that have actually implemented the software. And
Yeah.
it was kind of an edge case that this customer had pushed the limits. And initially it was great for them, but then they were just seeing things that was kind of beyond their experience. They've done very
Hmm.
well, super bright people. They're scientists who were using that sort of software, but kind of run out of their own expertise, right?
Yeah.
And they couldn't shut it down because they were getting what they needed from a business standpoint. And we were again able to make some
Yeah.
changes pretty quickly to get things under control. And then, sort of, once you take a bit of a pause, we're able to then work with them to get into a more solid architecture and get them connected directly up with the right people
Yeah.
at Amazon who help them, further. So,
So brilliant people that needed help. Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the people using it was phenomenal what they were doing in both of those cases. They used
Yeah.
things well, right? But sort of then ran into trouble.
I think that's part of it, right? Is that many times we're afraid to ask for help, afraid to
Right.
admit that we don't know something. But a lot of this is outside of our, especially those of us that were born on premises, right? That's how we came up through the ranks. This cloud can be mysterious for us. I've got some hypothetical use cases. I'd like to do a little bit of role playing here, John, if you don't mind.
No, go
So
for it.
I'm going to place you in a role and just ask you a question about how you would handle that. So in this first one, you're the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, mid enterprise organization. Let's say the company is in healthcare. In your application portfolio, you have a couple of SaaS applications. However, most of your apps are server based and run in your data center. You think you want to take advantage of the cloud, but you have heard these horror stories about costs getting out of control. What do you do to ensure that you don't become one of those stories?
Um, my thinking there is you bring in a skilled partner, like an Intervision. Obviously, I'm going to favor us, but bring in somebody who's really got experience to do an assessment in some shape or form of what the workloads are that you've got on prem, the applications. Understand, how they're supporting your business. Really, for as a team with the vendor you bring in, really sort of look at the big picture of how your technology is supporting your business, right? Um, Look at the areas where you may be wanting to make changes and areas where you don't, and understand your costs today, where you've got money being spent on servers, money being spent on people. People, a lot of the time, it's, there's a lot of money being spent on support staff, right? So really understand your current costs. And then sort of look to the areas where you may have a lot of technical debt, perhaps. Where can you make improvements that that will bring you the biggest bang for your buck, right? Get you
Yeah,
to your business objectives, right? This is not changing technology for technology's sake, right? You're
right.
looking to improve things. Are you concerned about security, cybersecurity? Everybody is, right? Are you concerned about DR? Do you have that taken care of? How can you factor all these things into a modernization plan, essentially, and leverage the benefits of the cloud to do that? So you come out with
Right.
improved performance, improved security, cost savings, and that journey there is probably a multi-phased project so that you move in a safe fashion, right, from your current environment and situation into a phased in approach
Yeah.
to a new environment. And it's not a one time event, Jeff. It's an ongoing initiative generally, right? And you want to sort of chop it up into pieces that fit with the rhythm of your business. Are there
Yeah.
certain times of year when you absolutely do not want to be making changes? Healthcare, I think of open enrollment,
Right. Right.
you probably don't want to be making any changes to anything around that time of year. And,
Yeah.
if you're that type of company. Um,
Absolutely.
and so those are the sort of things. Spend the time with a partner to have them understand your business, your technology,
Hmm.
what drives you as an organization, how you need to innovate with your clients to really get ahead. What are your goals? Make sure those are conveyed and understood and built in, and you understand how you're going to potentially, if you've got massive SQL Server costs and licensing costs, which we often see, can
Yeah.
you get that handled first to save some money that would fund a project? Can you take advantage of the funding coming from the major hyperscalers from
Yeah.
AWS and
Yeah.
Microsoft? They will fund a lot of this work,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we are experts in getting that funding for organizations. But really, best is we need to understand your business. Um, and it shouldn't just, again, be a technology change for the sake of it. That can certainly be a good
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's a plan.
Well, and that harkens back to you and I did an episode. Gosh, might be 2 years ago now. Time kind of flies by. On cloud first doesn't mean you're going big bang, right?
No.
You're gonna map it out and
Yeah.
move slowly. And then the other piece that you talked about there is talk to the cloud companies and find out what funding is available. Braden Pitts of MJ Insurance mentioned that on the episode that we ran a couple of weeks ago. Now, John, we're going to pause right there and we're going to listen to an ad from Intervision Systems, a word from Intervision Systems. You mentioned our company a couple of minutes ago and want to play this because, as listeners know, Intervision is the publisher of the Status Go podcast.
Unlock the power of more with Intervision Systems. We provide the cutting-edge technology and expert guidance you need to take your business to the next level. Don't settle for less. Choose Intervision Systems and discover what's possible. Contact us now to learn more.
And if you do want to learn more, visit intervision.com/myths to learn more about the myths we have been busting in this series and some about the myths that we're going to be addressing in months to come. Right now, we're talking with John Gray. John is the Chief Product Officer of Intervision, and I'm having him do a little role playing. We're talking different roles, different scenarios, and how he would approach the cloud to make sure that costs are maintained in an appropriate way, and to bust that myth that the cloud is too expensive. So, another scenario that I'd like to explore with you, John, I know it's one you can relate to. You've been involved in early stage startups in your
Mhm.
career. So now you're involved in one. You have no intention of leveraging on-premises servers. What things do you need to consider to make sure that you keep costs under control as you launch the startup and start to grow the startup?
Yeah, great question. And yes, I've been involved in startups. I'm still part owner of a company that we started that was cloud based. That's going very well, um, and using that as an example, we did not pay any infrastructure costs in the first 12 months because we took advantage of actually Amazon's free tier. Um, there is also funding available from the Amazons and Microsofts for startups that will then once you get beyond the free stuff will uh, really reduce the costs for you. And if you from the get go have the discipline to use automation and engineering, if you've got people or you have a partner who can do infrastructure as code and things and shut environments down and use serverless and be very much on the leading edge of cloud native, your costs can be really minuscule. But there's all of that sounds exciting. Um, there's a sort of old school discipline that you need in some shape or form in the company, though, and that is governance, right? Of
Mhm.
how you're leveraging the technology that you're leveraging, right? So you need to figure out how you're going to control it. So as you as a company start to expand and be successful and start to consume more technology, who's kind of overseeing that?
Yeah.
How are you reporting on it? Are you following FinOps, financial operations sort of best practices? Do you have budgeting alerts set up? Things like automation, right?
Yeah.
Things that will tip you off if things are suddenly spiraling, costs are going up, then you didn't expect them, right? So you can take your eye off it, and then periodically leverage others to come in and take a look at what you're doing, and can well architected reviews, those kinds of things. Look for ways to improve the technology. Every year is improving and becoming more and more cost effective. Look to the latest services that are available, the serverless, the various different ways the cloud is changing and evolving, and it's becoming less and less expensive if you use it right.
Yeah.
And but don't get so caught up in that you're changing stuff every day. It's like because you got to get on and build your business.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sort of set a cadence. And again, I would highly recommend bringing in a partner who's doing this stuff all day every day.
Yeah.
And to some degree in life you do get what you pay for, so get a partner that's good,
Yeah.
and spend a little money because it will save you money.
Yeah.
And we offer cost optimization services where we will in certain situations guarantee that what we do for you will pay more than pay for itself, right?
Yeah.
And then we recommend that you take those savings and further do refactoring and automation, but that doesn't apply to a company that's just starting out.
Just starting. Yeah. Yeah.
So you know um, recognize that you're going to fail at some things. Don't be afraid to try things. Pull in the cloud companies and other folks and see what you can get for
Yeah.
very little. Use the partners who know how to do that. Become a case study for them.
That's
Do a
right.
little
That's right.
bargaining.
Yeah.
If we do this for you, can you help us with some free consulting? And you'll
Yeah.
find,
Yeah.
yeah, you've got
You got some
so
leverage. Yeah.
yeah, you
Yeah.
do. If you
Yeah.
particularly if you're in an exciting area of business, and so. Um, Because a lot of times these days, I mean, it used to be data processing and then IT, separate from the main part of a company, right? Whereas
Yeah. Yeah.
technology, fully digitalized companies, it's completely wrapped in to what you do,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's no longer, something that you've got people off in a different segment of your
Yeah.
company.
It is part of the business.
It's
Yeah.
part of the
Yeah.
business,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and you raise a couple of great points in there, John. One is if you're in this startup scenario that we're going through this situation, take advantage of the free tier for as long as it makes sense for you to do
Hmm.
so. And then the other thing that I think you mentioned that I really want to emphasize is take the time to put your governance in place. You're a founder or you're early employee in a startup. you're excited about the product or service that you're building, and you don't want to slow down. But sometimes you have to slow down to put those governance pieces in place, so that you don't have to pay the piper later on. Well, let's try one more scenario, John. Now
Okay.
you're the vice president of technology for a company. You have a hybrid architecture with a mixture of on prem, SaaS, and cloud based applications. To further complicate things, you have a multi cloud architecture. How do you keep costs in check in that environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where most companies find themselves at this point, right? Multi cloud, because you may be using one cloud, one hyperscaler for your main applications, another one for analytics, another one for your security, Active Directory, those kinds of things. And you've got things on prem, you've got SaaS, because SaaS is a good way to go for certain things where, it's cookie cutter for your needs. How do you keep your costs in check? Um, you need to monitor them, right?
Mhm.
Fundamental. We do. We've got a FinOps, financial operations service that we provide to customers, and it's very cost effective for them. And we look at, we're not just cloud. We can, look at your networking costs.
Yeah.
Should you now you've grown in, growing into a multi-location? Should you be moving to SD-WAN? Should you be considering as a service version of things?
Yeah.
Um, are your needs somewhat unique or customized in certain areas? Um, it's really sort of ongoing discipline of having a cadence to look at things, weekly, monthly, quarterly. It's easier if you've got one vendor that you're working with who provides that for you, right? And you've
Yeah.
got budgeting and alerting and things set up automatically. So you know that you're not going to go too far out of whack and you're going to, or if things start to escalate beyond what they were last month, why are you suddenly spending more? Well,
Yeah.
perhaps it's, you're a education organization and it's a, everybody's signing up for class and we would expect it this month.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
so use the tools, use predictive AI, right? Predictive analytics and things like that
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
sort of run models and to, identify improvements for you and, really start to become a data driven organization, right? So that you have the data that tells you where your money's being spent. You can see how much a particular business transaction is costing you. If you're selling, sneakers, how much does it cost for each one? If you've got a marketing campaign going, get the metrics coming out of that, right? Your call
Yeah.
center,
Yeah.
contact center, omni-channel. Look, really where you can instrument your, it's kind of an old school term again, but if you're instrumenting your software and your infrastructure and things and you've got data coming off of it that you can then track in analytics and KPIs, and there's so much now with the clouds, versions of the BI tools that you can do so
Yeah.
quickly
Yeah.
in the dashboards that you can be looking at, that can be proactively alerting you and tracking and do trailing 12 month analysis on certain key indicators so you can see if you're getting better or worse. Really understand where your money is going, where it's variable, where it's fixed, um, and put together a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year plan for where you're going to spend money going forward to refactor. And because technology continues to change, right? It's
Yeah.
not a implement, get it done, and then we don't have to think about it. It's You
Because the
want to
clouds are adding more and more services all the time. There may be
right,
other things that you can take advantage of. So,
exactly.
so John, we're here to bust the myth that the cloud is too expensive. What would you say to a CIO or an IT director that told you, John, I'm not moving to the cloud because it is too expensive? How do you respond to that?
Well, I'd say, well, how do you know that? If the answer, if somebody's got the information, look, I've got this very customized factory that's got robotics in it, and it's massively sensitive to network latency, and it doesn't, there's certain scenarios that are edge cases where I go, okay, yeah, no, you're right, the cloud is not going to be huge for you in that. There's probably data analytics and things that can be done in the cloud for you, but know why, right? Because
Yeah,
I don't buy that as just a blanket statement, right? For all the reasons and all the things I've just discussed. So know where your
right.
money is going and how it supports your business. And if cloud is just there's cloud infrastructure that is just technology, but there's increasingly a whole bunch of higher level services in the cloud, right?
Yeah,
That are not infrastructure. They're AI. They're many things as a service, right? Databases as a service. So when you say the cloud's too expensive, that's an increasingly large set of things, right?
yeah, yeah,
So including software as a service. I mean, that is cloud. Most of those companies, all of them are running in the hyperscalers. So
yeah, yeah.
you know, if the right answer is to go to software as a service, you're using cloud.
That's right.
Just
That's right.
somebody else is doing it for you.
Yeah,
So yeah, have somebody verify that for you. Challenge them.
yeah.
You know,
Challenging. Yeah,
challenge a company like ours. Say, hey, we're not going to the cloud because it's going to be too expensive, and here's our why we believe that. Show us why that's not the case.
not the
Right?
case. Yeah, I love that. That reminds me of the episode we had with Sam Foldegard several weeks ago when Sam is in he's an account executive. He's in business development for Intervision, and his message was challenge him, right? As a
Yeah.
prospect, have him show you. I love that. Well, John, we are out of time, my friend, and I want to thank you for carving out time to chat with us today and helping us to bust this myth that the cloud is too expensive. So thank you, sir.
Well, pleasure, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
There you have it, folks. Myth busted. The cloud is an excellent option. And if you do it right and you plan and put the parameters around it and the governance around it, it doesn't have to be too expensive. In fact, you can save money leveraging the cloud, and you can obtain technologies that you may not be able to afford otherwise. To learn more and dive deeper into these myths, visit intervision.com/myths. To find the show notes and the interview transcript, go to intervision.com/status-go. The show notes will provide links and contact information. And if you're interested in continuing the discussion, look for the Status Go podcast group on LinkedIn. This is Jeff Tunn for John Gray. Thank you very much for listening.
You've been listening to the Status Go podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or get more information at intervision.com. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, find Intervision on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thank you for listening. Until next time.